Hello, good afternoon. We'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us. I'm Birgit Green with the Office of University Outreach and Engagement, and we very much are excited that you are joining us today for the keynote presentation of our 2021 Virtual Engaged Scholarship Symposium. Which is part of, for the very first time, part of Discoveries to Impact, which in turn represents a partnership between our office, the Center for the Integration of STEM Education and Research, the Innovation Hub, and the Center for Transformative Undergraduate Experiences. And you might have already participated in the undergraduate research conference yesterday, which was a very exciting day where we heard from students about their research that's impacting communities and society. And then on Monday, we had the startup competition and a fantastic keynote speaker as part of the Innovation Hub's events of Discoveries to Impact. One thing that I wanted to remind everybody of about before we forget, there will be an afternoon session at 2 o'clock. So we'll just take a quick break after this session, and you can either log off and log back on using the same link, or just stay with us for the duration of the break. I will turn this over now to Dr. John Opperman, who is the Associate Vice Provost for University Outreach and Engagement, and he will provide a short welcome and introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Birgit. Good afternoon. Welcome to everyone to the keynote address for the Engaged Scholarship Symposium. First, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank all those who had a part in putting together the Discoveries to Impact conference this week. Obviously, we'd all like to have met in person, but I think the Zoom conference worked well, and I want to thank everybody that had a part in all that. I'd also like to congratulate all our Outreach and Engagement Award winners. We heard from 2 of them this morning and have 2 more this afternoon. I think it's a very strong group of award winners that demonstrates the importance of outreach and engagement, engaged scholarship as a university priority. It's my pleasure this afternoon to introduce our keynote speaker, Courtney Griesel, the Economic Development Director for the City of Springfield, Oregon. Courtney oversees citywide economic development and manages 2 urban renewal areas for the city, and she can tell us more about that community later, but of interest to us in particular is that Courtney's also a part of the leadership team for the EPIC network. For those of you not familiar with EPIC, it stands for Educational Partnerships for Innovation and Communities. It's a network of universities across the country and world that promote university community partnerships to improve the quality of life in their communities. Texas Tech joined the EPIC network a little over a year ago, just before the pandemic hit, as a matter of fact. And with their help, the Office of Outreach and Engagement has been working on a project we are calling the Resilient Communities Initiative, or RCI. The Resilient Communities Initiative is a collaboration between Texas Tech University and regional community partners, both public and private, to improve the resiliency of the region and its citizens by leveraging the resources of the university with those of the communities. We actually started working on this before the pandemic hit, and I think as much as anything else, the pandemic has demonstrated just how important the resiliency and sustainability of communities is, and how fragile that can be at times. We hope to roll out our first RCI projects this fall, with an emphasis on partnerships with nonprofit organizations and local school districts. But ultimately, RCI could encompass programs related to community needs in food, housing, education, healthcare, and transportation, among others. So we hope to have faculty, staff, and students collaborate with community partners, not only to enhance the resiliency of our communities, but also to transform teaching, learning, and research at the university by doing so. You'll be hearing more about RCI in the coming months, but I do want to encourage any of you that would be interested in participating in this initiative, please contact our office. Courtney's topic for today is the role of public universities in building resilient communities. So it should be especially instructive for our own work. Since local government here all over the country has been fighting the pandemic, we've limited our involvement with them on the RCI to date. But Courtney's topic today is timely as we begin those conversations and work on our projects for rolling out in the fall, pandemic permitting. She'll be drawing upon her work with the City of Springfield in partnership with the University of Oregon and other local colleges, and also through the consulting she's done in other communities in her role with the EPIC network. Courtney has a master's degree in organizational leadership from Gonzaga University and bachelor's degree in planning, public policy, and management from the University of Oregon. So with those two alma maters, Courtney, I can imagine you had some pretty good NCAA brackets for the tournament. And of course, Gonzaga is still very much alive.
Yeah, I'm winning my my bracket group.
I bet you are. Yeah. Well, Gonzaga is still alive, but regardless of what happens on that side of the bracket, there will be a Texas team in the championship game. Unfortunately, it won't be Texas Tech though.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I got Baylor. Those are my two. So I brought Texas Tech a little ways, maybe a little longer. I had more hope, but.
Well, I think you're in good shape. But
yeah.
Anyway, with that, Courtney, thank you for being with us today, and I will turn it over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate it. I'm really honored to be here. I'm going to share my screen. So I have been with the city for about 17 years. I think after 15, I should really stop counting. It just doesn't feel good anymore. But as you heard, my degree's really been in urban planning from the beginning. And I walked into City Hall ready to be an urban planner and permit driveways and review building designs, and realized it just wasn't quite enough. It wasn't quite enough place for movement, momentum, and disruption, if you will. And so I quickly moved across the hall into economic development, where everything was new, every project is different every single time, and really have never left, and just found that that's really what energizes me. A little bit about who I am, so you kind of know what motivates me. You see my son there. I am a mom first and foremost. That said, I'm a mom that works a whole lot. So this is, I was actually down, we were testing a seismic system on a structure in California, and I put him on the plane with me. It was the best way to kind of do work and also still be a mom. As John mentioned, I'm a ZAG and I'm a duck. My degree in organizational leadership really does make me maybe more of a ZAG than a duck. I tend to just really pine for those years. Our economic development program sits in the city manager's office. Oregon's an interesting place in that our tax structure means we don't necessarily have quite the same sales tax or way of funding EDOs or EDCs, economic development organizations, that you might see in Texas area. I think your EDO is LEDA in that region. So we function differently. That activity actually comes out of the city manager's office in our community. And we really are focused on the same types of things you see LEDA doing, business support, growth, that's retention, it's expansion, it's incentives, it's things like site readiness. And what I really say now is it also needs to be site worthiness, right? So you can get a site ready, but if it's not really worthy for making that return on its investment, maybe it slips a little bit in the priority order. And that's where we get into I do a lot of land acquisitions for the city and facilitation of development, public-private partnerships and development. The other role that I've become pretty accustomed to is sitting down at the table with our planners and engineers, and sometimes grounding the incredible concepts in the economics of our region. We can put incredible pictures on paper, but if our region can't afford the rents needed to build that, we will never get there. And so I spend a lot of time in that sort of ground sleuthing. And by its very nature, it's relational. My job is to have relationships, to see the systems, how they interlock, and to see the places for change and sort of constant evolution. And then, like most people in economic development and even city government, special projects, which that really translates to all other duties as assigned. This is we don't know what this is, give it to Courtney, she'll do it. And this kind of is where the Sustainable City Year came into play with the University of Oregon and now EPIC. This is kind of me in a nutshell. If there's a reason for a hard hat, a vest, boots, and mud, I am probably there. And there are lots of people involved. I am also the person that's always asking the question about where is the work now, because we cannot be static. Where it is today is already behind us. And that means we need to be planning for when it is time for it to rebirth, when it is time for it to evolve and innovate and change again. And that's an interesting place in a city government, because we rarely have that time to just let things go through its normal cycle of life. But with economic development, I sort of get the privilege of being the person that's allowed to sort of exist in that place of it's not working anymore. So it's okay for us to pull it apart and reassemble it differently. So I always know I do enough global work and foreign direct investment and recruitment work. I'll tell you, Team Texas is your state's FDI team. They're incredible. We do work with them because they're incredible, and normally they will beat us on a project. So go Texas. But I do acknowledge that there's a little bit of a Springfield where. There are, over 24 Springfields in the US, so by name, we're not all that special. But I'll tell you, we are the actual Springfield of The Simpsons, if that's something you care about. I don't know that I do, but I will say it's a family that eats together and prays together, so they're fine by me. We are a population of about 60,000 people, but what's really important is we are neighbors to the city of Eugene, and that is where the University of Oregon is. And we are such neighbors that our community member could reach across their fence and hold hands with the city of Eugene community member. You really don't know when the communities separate. And that also means that we have a population of 60,000. But our community expects that we will function and behave as a metro area of almost 300,000. And that's tough, because our resources fund at the 60,000, but our weight class is higher. We're on the West Coast I-5 corridor, and we're near a lot of ports. We have access to rail. This is the parts that make my job fun in economic development. We are a city manager form of government, similar to Lubbock area. We have a lot of similarities actually to you all from the little bit I know. I have been to your community, and so I'm happy to say that I've paid attention enough to know that ag is important to you all. It's important to us too. Food and beverage, especially in that sort of organic blueberries, wine, hops, those tend to be a wetter climate for us. So that's our ag. Similarly, medical is a big industry for us. And then we are really rooted in wood products. So we kind of timber fiber sort of flows through our veins, and the heart of why we started was wood products. In an Oregon political environment, that puts us in sort of a unique place. It is our underpinning of why our economy exists, but at times it can be very contentious in political environment. So, that's who we've always been. And then we all went through this last year, and we're still going through it, right? There was not a magic moment at New Year's that fixed it all for us. COVID-19 hit. And it just didn't stop. It kept rolling, right? And we saw this. The community started, as we're recovering, we're trying to figure out how to get the unhoused into safe locations, how to figure out where testing was going to go, how to suddenly go from in-person council meetings to completely virtual. We then watched our community erupt into protests, riots that crossed both Eugene and Springfield borders. I mean, this is not us being special. This was everywhere. And it called for some really clear and needed action as well, relevant action in police review and just general program review. And as if that were not enough, we then had our mayor resign. And so that sort of stability of the council leadership started to peter and fall. And it wasn't just a quick resignation. It took months of what's going to happen, who's going to assume the seat, who will be the mayor. So that uncertainty and unrest just started to really anchor into the community. And to top it off, for the first time in our history, a wildfire in Oregon actually breached our city limits. It actually moved in enough that we evacuated nearly 7,000 homes. And suddenly the pressure of COVID and the fear of COVID, where we all had safe havens of our home to go to, those of us who have homes, we're starting to pack up those safe havens, right? And so now we're being told, like, leave your home. And even when I look at these images now, because we were one of those cars, I find myself emotional. As a city government, you can't run, right? You have to stay. And it was a tough year. So this lasted for about a month. And as that year started to kind of unravel, everything we knew about ourselves still was true, but as others mentioned, just elevated, right? And what we also knew is that people stayed. We are hardworking. Our company stayed. They figured it out. They found a way. We're innovative. We just are by nature. We're scrappy. I don't like to put that in writing because people take it the wrong way, but if you are a timber town, you are a scrappy town. And I say that with some of our mills being the most advanced in North America, but they are still bootstrapping scrappy companies. And they're proud, and we're proud. And that's partly why we stay, right? And it's also why the community ends up supporting the solutions. They came out with more passion than ever before and more frustration. But as the solutions begin to evolve, they do support it. And then we're resilient. And part of that's because we have to be, right? A city doesn't have the ability to just close its doors and go home. Like I said, even if we bankrupt, we can't disappear. We have to remain. And I think that really is part of this question about, so what is the role of a university in all that? And even I would say, if the question is what is the role of a university in building a resilient community, well, what makes for a resilient community? And what's interesting about that question is resilience is almost this sort of aspirational hypocrisy, right? You have to be bendable, like bendy and pliable. The wind comes and you just have to fold over, but then you have to be very rigid and spring right back into place. You have to be stable, you have to be deep-rooted, and you have to be quick, right? So I can bend, but I have to be quick, and I have to know everything. The city needs to be knowledgeable. They have to know everything. They have to understand the system of everything to be resilient. And the system has to be engineered to be equitable. I mean, that equitable and intentional, and that's sort of this new lens of it's no longer okay to just do things because we've always done them. You need to do them intentionally and equitably and fast and always changing and cheap. It has to be cheap. So that kind of gets to this question of like the way of thinking about it, right? And this is like preparing for almost a bad punchline to a bad joke. But, a business owner walks into a bank and she basically says, like, look, I have no revenue in my bank accounts. I have a ton of customers and my product is really good. But the reality is my building is falling down. I'm still doing my budget planning, pen and paper, if I even have time to do it. The businesses around me are closing and my suppliers won't call me back anymore. Not sure what that's about. And And I also can't find employees. You know, I have programs for them and the policies exist, but I wrote them 40 years ago and they're a little hard to navigate. And also my board is a mess. They don't agree on anything and they don't trust each other. And actually my customers don't trust us either. Can I get some capital? Right? And I mean, I guess the question is, do they get the loan? Does she get the loan? Probably not. The other question is, is she a bad business? No, probably not. She's a business that hasn't innovated. And also interestingly, if you think about what bank she picked to walk into, was probably not the new little one out on the edge of town. It was probably one that is well known, probably the largest bank she could find in town, the one with the largest building, the most tellers, with people that she knew, right? Like, this is not someone from the other side of the country. She's looking at a bank like, I know these people, I know this bank, they've always been here. I'm going to try there. They might understand. I can count on them. What's interesting about that idea is it's not that much different than what it might feel like as a city manager at this point, with all the pressures to walk into the council and say, look, we have a fundamental imbalance. We have deferred maintenance for years on very important things, but we cannot go away, and our community needs us, and they need us more now than ever, and they need it to be tech enabled, immediate, and they need 3 more things we've never done before. And we have 100 years of policies, and we need to unravel them, but we don't have time to do it. And I need you guys to get along. City council, like, can we put some effort and funding towards, innovating? And that's, again, this is not a bad city. This is just innovation that has been deferred in place for sort of an expectation that work is done as cheaply as possible and as quickly as possible. And I think this is where we get into this idea of how do we start to break that cycle? If every one of these sticky notes is a program or a city of the service, a service of the city, what place is that service of the city? Is it impoverished? Is it yielding fruit? Is it no longer needed and time to break apart? And cities think about this. They think about where their priorities are as far as productivity. But we don't always have the opportunity to take it out of that maturity or age stage and start to mold it back into something new and more productive and more efficient. And so you just you fall behind. So it sounds bleak, honestly, because it sometimes feels really bleak. But again, we can't go home and we can't not do the work. So, our universal landscape, I call it universal. And I think I mentioned to Katie, and Brigitte at one point, it's sort of like the mother-in-law scenario. It truly is universal. There is always tension in these places. And it's kind of commonly known, right? We have these issues and they are the same in Springfield as I imagine they are in Lubbock, as I know they are in Cape Town or Bangkok. The colors and themes and shape can look different, but the truth is we are more and more global than we ever have been. Access, knowledge, technology means that the global economies affect everything down to Main Street, and it affects them very quickly. And cities have not been set up to move quickly, so it puts us behind. And we have no margin for failure. And that's something we hear often. There is no grace or margin for failure from the community because it is their funds, it is their tax dollars. And that's a difficult place to be in. And then when we add what's just occurred in the last year that's really highlighted things, we now have to compete. So it's not just that I have my community members in Springfield, it's that I need to compete to keep them every day, because they now know they could move to Texas, and some of them are. They could get more somewhere else if we don't provide it. And if we can't fix that immediately, we will start to lose. And if it's not equitable and affordable, we will also start to lose. So I think it's not just the impacts of COVID to all of us, it's the impacts of everything. And it has just been highlighted, elevated, and reinforced. And it's insert here, right? It's natural disasters. For us, it's fire. For you all, it may be tornado, drought. It's not that it's, global warming. It's not an argument about what it is. It's that things are changing. Pests are occurring. Cycles are changing, and we need to know what those are. Political landscapes everywhere. So in this kind of who we are moving forward and who we'll have to be, we're stretched in our capacity. We're tired. We're disincented to take risks. And the irony of all of that is you as the university are the opposite, right? There's freshness. There is expanded capacity. There are students and faculty that feed and generate energy and generate ideas, and they thrive on the cycle of failure and reinvention, right? It's really never failure. And I think there's kind of a reason that these two things side by side make a lot of sense. I hear when we say the university has been quiet and left the city be for the last year, but on some level, the university has the ability to carry water and carry risk in places that sometimes a city cannot. And I think we know universities have been doing this, right? We all can say, well, we do this. We do it in service learning courses, in project-based courses, studios, the capstones and research projects. We've all had internships. A lot of these come to us as a city after the ideation's already happened. So they come to us after the problem statement's already been stated by the students or the faculty, and the report's been mostly drafted. And we get kind of a here, we did this for you. We think your bike plan should look like what we've seen around the Louvre in Paris. And then you're like, wow, great, on the shelf. But what's missing here is the timing, but also where are the regular courses, right? A university stability sits in this place where from 100 level up, there are fundamental courses in economics and business planning and agricultural management. They're the underpinnings of why students come to you in the first place. And when we look at our typical partnerships, we don't see a lot of partnership in those spaces, in those existing courses. And the other thing sometimes we don't see is that element of students on campus leaving campus, right? So like how many students have ever actually come to a city council meeting? So if we're asking the question of how do we build a resilient community, part of it is you have to become part of it, right? And how do we build a resilient and kind of next generation of workforce? They have to understand the community they're plugging into. Just double checking here. Sorry, just checking on a comment. So, this is an important question for us as we think about resilience. Resilience is a network, it's a system. It's really joining a campus that sometimes feels like an isolated city to the city around it, just intrinsically binding it. And that's where we get back to thinking about, that lens of what resilience is for a city. And then saying, what happens if the question flips and becomes, well, what makes a resilient partnership? Because it's all the same things, right? The partnership it's dependable and it's stable. It's by systems thinking, it means it's sort of rooted. It's ingrained from start to finish. So the partnership acknowledges all cycles of the project, not just the point where the student says, I know the city wants a school, I'm an architecture student. I don't really care about why they want the school or where they want the school. I'm just going to draw them a picture of the school. That's not a systems thinking approach because it's missing the important real life variables, right? The partnership has to kind of anchor into those variables. So this is really where that EPIC model, the educational partnerships for innovation in communities, EPIC, starts to sort of change the thinking. So we've always kind of said, and we've said this around the world, because it is the same question everywhere we go, because it's the same problem everywhere you go. It's the mother-in-law issue. So what if your university, your existing university courses could connect to your community, and you do it over an entire academic year? And the connection to the community is rooted in the community's existing problems and projects. So it's not just that you do communities to, or you do projects to your community. It's that you do your projects or your courses with your community. And it's done in such a way that city leadership really have no choice but to embrace it and invest in it, right? And so that becomes this structure, right? And we talk about the fundamental tenets of the model and sort of like the true North Star parts, the pieces where you have to ask yourself every moment, am I in the model or am I not in the model? And one is that it really respects the structure of the city. It asks a lot of questions about it, and it respects the structure of the university. Your faculty, as faculty teaching core courses, sometimes we're really rooted in research and excited about research, but we forget how valuable those core courses are to the minds walking campus and where they will go in the future. And it really aims at improving quality of life because you want the projects to truly be implemented. The work really must get done. It must make change and impact. And the way we do it is that it's community identified. Those projects exist, they're prioritized, they've been talked about, they're not a new idea for the community. And we do it in large numbers. So that massive scale, and again, existing city projects, these are in our capital plans, they're in our budget plans, they're on the council's work plans, and existing core courses like open the catalog, right? And you're local to us. It's not that the University of Oregon is going to come down to Lubbock and we're going to help your city manager and his staff do projects. That would make no sense. There's no contextual relevance. I can act like I understand, but I don't. You understand. Texas Tech understands because you were part of the family, right? That is your house. And so kind of here's an example of how this works. And then I'll pause for a minute to see if we have any questions coming in. I want to be mindful of your time. So an example of an EPIC model really is the university taking a year to focus on one community for your whole academic year. And I think you all are in semesters. Thank you for the head nod, Katie. So it's about you being local in your local community. You invest that whole year. And it's multiple projects, it's multiple courses. And that takes work, it takes coordination. And it means that you ask that city for a program manager or a point of contact. In our partnership, that person was me. And that person's often in a city manager's office. They can be an assistant city manager. They are someone that has the systems view and direct line to the council. And the university program manager has sort of a similar perspective. They know the colleges, they know the academic strengths, and they have the network. This is kind of, I think, in structure images. So this is sort of how that hierarchy-ish works. For us, we always have the community at the top of the hierarchy. Sometimes, depending on the political theme, mayor and community wants to reverse themselves and argue about it, doesn't matter. What becomes really important here is that there's two best friends in this. There's the municipalities manager for the program and the universities. And you end up speaking multiple times a week. You're on rapid text relationships. And that's because you're herding cats. These two people spend their time matching courses. So we spend a lot of time sitting at a table with the university manager, just asking questions. What's in your plans? What do you care about? What is your structure? And the municipality, the program manager on the city side, my job is to say, here are the 10 things plaguing us. And spending time with staff to say, where are you at in your work plan? Are there small nuggets of your work that I can take off your table, your plate, and we can let some students really chew on it? So for Springfield, it meant that we offered up 14 of our priority projects. There was constructions of libraries. There was some industry familiarity work that we needed to do, some transportation projects. In the city, these things have a name. So it might be the Laura Street project. But when we talk to a university about that, there is no Laura Street project course at the university. There is also not a road course or how to build a road course. But what there might be is a course on community outreach and engagement. There may be a course on pedestrian and bicycle planning. There are small courses that exist that are all the fundamental parts of the skill sets of our employees. And that's what we care about. So it meant that we had 14 projects, but when we started to pull those apart to ask for help, it made up about 30 courses. And that's where you start to get these numbers, right? Some of these are large courses. They're 25, 45, even 50 students. We get that in some of the planning classes. And that's a lot of hours of work, a lot of creativity. And we really tapped into about 10 different colleges within the university. The other thing I'll note, this is that context and relevancy piece. Our partnership was the Sustainable City Year project. That's what it was called by the university. The word sustainable was politically charged in our community. So in like week 2, we quickly transitioned it and said, hey, we're just going to go SCY for our year. That was important because that was a quick tweak to make sure that we weren't accidentally off-putting leadership and shoving them through a doorway they weren't yet ready for. By the end of our partnership, it was the Sustainable City Year partnership. Kind of just to talk about, there's the universal issues, ours were the same. And even now, they are some of the same things we wrestle with. We're just a little bit more equipped. So I'll give you a couple examples of some of our projects and then also some of others, and I'll try and do this quickly. Our community really struggled. They drove by a lot of mills, a lot of industry, and there was coming to a point with the state where there was a lot of legislation showing up that would have had some very dire impacts on industry's ability to operate and afford to operate. And it became very clear to us that we needed our community to understand that these buildings they saw housed people who were proud of the products they made, and that these people were their neighbors. These people are important, and these products are something to be proud of. And so it became a question of how do we do that? And what we ended up doing was bringing in some photography students, some journalism students, and it became a class on a campaign for the pride, people, and products in Springfield. And what's interesting about this is our industry, we have strong relationships with them, but there is something unnerving about a student coming in and taking photos of process. It feels far warmer than the government coming in and taking photos of their process. Planning is another place we will plan things to death. We are very good at that. But sometimes it means we will plan them to non-existence. And we asked students, we've had a planning project that has just been stuck. And we basically said, we can't figure out why people won't navigate the code. And so we handed it over to students, and their process was to look at this and say, well, partly the things you want, if you actually assemble your code, you can't build. your code precludes your intent. And that was really important for our council to hear. And the students had the time to do the comparison and the analysis. It's not that we couldn't have figured it out. It's that we don't have the time or the capacity in that moment to figure it out as quickly as it needed to be found. These are also those places where we can focus on very big projects. How are we going to handle water in our own systems? But sometimes we need community members and residents to help us handle water in their systems. And so it drops to the bottom of the list, but it's very important. And so we brought students in to start asking, again, a communications question, multimedia. What does it look like to communicate what happens to their rainwater and why we need them to filter it? Where does water go? What is the science of it? And how do you translate that into a community messaging? And then ultimately, the students ended up building a demonstration structure at one of the local elementary schools. This gets into that roadway. This is where these partnerships start to make sense for a community. Ultimately, we needed community outreach and some design to be introduced to community members about safety of a transportation corridor. And what's great is when we would knock on the door as government, we get yelled off the porch. We're really not a bad community. I don't think this is special. I think this happens in a lot of places, but when the government comes, it's rarely a good thing. When a student knocks on the door, they get cookies. And I think that's where some of these projects can shift and we can end up meeting in a place we need to be, which is we needed the input and residents were open to providing the input to students. And at this point, we've now crafted a project that's moved far enough along. The plans from the students actually sat on the shelf for a couple years, but we applied for a grant in 2017, a federal grant, and were granted it based on the work the students did. They got us that far along that we could at least submit the document and grant, and now that project's under construction. And these are where those partnerships start to make a lot of sense for a community because it started in something that was important to us and pre-existing. And I geek out on this one with a background in economics. You know, we're really good at telling community members, trust us, this fee will return a investment to you, it'll improve your property values. But, you know, residents know, like their gut knows when something doesn't seem quite right. And the truth was, actually, it didn't in all cases. So these examples they show up in many places. You know, these are not my community, but this understanding that we have these facilities, industry is innovating, how the facilities are used has to innovate too. And sometimes we're lagging. A community knows this is a problem, and we are often happy to hand that problem statement over to a university for their help. And then the students end up with a true case study at a local level instead of focusing on something in a different state elsewhere or a textbook. And students are also eager to jump into the conversations about environmental impacts, what they typically will define as sustainability and resilience, while we push them towards resilience and sustainability of a community or economics. You know, there is also a lot of energy around our environment and our natural resources and where are we habitating? Are we in the right places? Will the places we live today be available here for us in 50 years? Do we need to start making those migration changes now? These are really hard conversations to have at a community level with the council or led by the council. But when a student introduces it in partnership with staff, it's a safer conversation because it's student work. And so it doesn't carry the same fear or imminent perception of sort of imminent truth. And so this gets back to that, your role in the work, right? By your design, by a university's very design and history and stability, you are positioned to be the strongest partner for your community. You are near to them. You are looking at real world problems with thousands of students and faculty. You are able to teach in your actual community, right? If you pivot to teaching based in the actual community and influenced by global patterns, it is impossible to not create movement and help that community build to a more resilient place. Your students become ingrained in it. They start to care. And you're creating momentum by the very design of those minds leaving campus and thinking globally about their local economy and their local place. Momentum will occur. It has nowhere else to go. And so what the EPIC network really serves to do is support how this model starts to move into the universities and really innovate the practice of higher education. Not innovate the places where you're already really good at innovating. It's really an and model. It's about innovating at that coursework to make it easier for faculty and make communities hungry for it. You know, your students write final papers, they draw amazing images, and they turn them in and they put hours of work into it. And the faculty look at it and they're incredible. And then it just goes under the desk. But what happens if your university is sitting on the edge of their seat waiting for those finals to come in because they want them? They want the images, they want the summaries, they want the ideas. And that's really the EPIC network serves in this place to do everything we can if a university is interested to help them explore this idea and to help them match with their local community. So just so you kind of see who's in our network, we are global. This is something that was very scary in the beginning, but then when we realized that the issues in Kenya may look a little different, but at the core level, we're all humans fighting for the same things and struggling with the same burdens and hungry for the same dependability, which is where the universities, especially in countries like Africa, the university is often the most dependable and stable institution. It became clear that there was no reason to just make this a US thing. And so we do spend quite a bit of time. We now have an EPIC Asia network, EPIC Africa network, South America, and the United Nations is a strong partner with us in this work, as well as the US EPA. What is interesting about this is while cities today in the US may not understand the value of having this work that is tied to the UN and the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN, they may not see why that's valuable today. Resilience is about planning for 20 years from now. And there will be a moment in years ahead where we start to see shifts in how funding is acquired, how projects are done, and that global economy truly does take over to the point that having some background where work has been done with these networks and ties becomes very valuable to a community. And so I think we're just really excited to be on that leading edge right now, and that as part of the EPIC network, which Texas Tech is, you're part of that too. And then we get excited if your cities are ready to hop in and try something new as well. These are just some of our global partners. This is the stuff that sometimes just gets me up in the morning, so it's really exciting. And I appreciate you all letting me take over your Wednesday hour and be here. So if there's any questions, I think I went right up to time, which doesn't leave you much room, but.
There were a couple things. First of all, in the EPIC model where, okay, you're the city representative, and just listening to this, you're the perfect person for that. Who did the University of Oregon have? What kind of staff person do they have in their role?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so each university handles this a little different. Our university had a funded position in one of the programs in the Sustainable Cities Initiative program. And And so that funded position, we actually contributed some funds to that position to make sure that they were available for the year. And that's why our courses being existing, like on our capital plans, on our funded, work plans, was important, because if we were putting a library project in front of students, I needed a coordinator at the university, and it meant that we carved off about $1,200 of that $400,000 budget, and that went over to the university. And for every project we did that, but they were existing, and so they had existing budgets, and so you could pull some of that fund out. Typically, an EPIC model program will have a dedicated staff person in it, out of the department that houses it, who will run it. Sometimes they're grant funded, sometimes they are existing staff that's kind of double dutying. So I was the program manager for the city. I had my full-time job as well. It was a tough year. I took a long vacation when it was over. And so the university has to be a little bit more sustainable. It typically becomes a permanent position after time.
Okay, so I guess my first thought was, in terms of lining up regular courses to do this, which I think is a great way to do it. It seems like if somebody was in the provost office, that would be an easier thing to do in terms of navigating the university side of it.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if it's more of a special project kind of thing, it could be located anywhere, I guess.
I think sometimes you kind of test it out and see. What we have found is that sometimes it's a faculty member, and they don't realize that they want to do it. So one of our strong programs is the SAGE program down in San Diego. Jessica Barlow is the program manager for that, or the director for that. She's a linguist, and she's still a linguist, and she's still one of the senior faculty members in the linguistics program. So she was like, why would I do this work with cities? But it turned out that it was about her networks, her way of thinking, her energy. And so it is sort of about finding that person that has that connection, and that this is the work that fills their cup. But the connection within faculty is pretty important, because faculty are busy. There's a lot going on, and you want it to be a person that the faculty will respond to an email or take a call from.
Good, thank you.
We have one question from Levi Johnson, and he's wondering if you can talk a little bit about the finance model between the city and the university, how that is structured.
Sure. Again, this is a place where the EPIC model is flexible. And so I'll talk a bit about Springfield and the University of Oregon's. Our partnership cost in total about $200,000 for the whole year. That was substantial. Over half of it was grant funded. We had an economic development agency fund grant under our belt. But that grant was not for the Sustainable City Year Partnership. That grant was going into several key projects. So we had received the funding, and now we needed to move very fast on implementing the projects by the federal deadline. And so we had to pull from those existing budgets to create an agreement, an intergovernmental agreement with the university, to then fund that staff person to assist throughout. We also put some funding into each of the courses. So we offered each faculty member $1,500. And that was if you want to bring in a guest speaker, if you need to rent buses to come to the city, if you want to purchase an extra textbook. It was the faculty members were still getting their salary. It was a base course, so they were going to teach it no matter what. But this was sort of a little incentive to teach an architecture course about a library instead of an architecture course about a European museum. And so that was it for us. We have a number of models that actually don't have a funding relationship, although they do have an intergovernmental agreement related to the rules of how we'll engage. I will be responsive. I will give you data layers. I will come to your midterms and finals to be part of your review team. I will bring my consultants in to be part of your review team. I mean, in some ways, it's just about agreeing how we will work together. And some models have a funding mechanism, some do not.
Great. Well, we are out of time. Thank you so much, Courtney, for sharing your insights about how universities and communities can work together. We really appreciate it. And for those who are in attendance, as Dr. Opperman mentioned, we are actively launching the Resilient Communities Initiative here at Texas Tech, because we are part of the EPIC-N network, and we love the model of getting more students involved and faculty involved in real world community-based problem solving. So feel free to contact us if you want to be part of this, if you're thinking you'd like to incorporate these experiences for your students into the curriculum. I mean, our office is here to help you find partners, to help identify the local needs, to connect you with people in the community, and to guide you along the way if you need any support, and again convening support or otherwise. So we'll be glad to visit with you more about it. And again, thanks again for joining us. Thanks to Courtney. And we'll take a quick 5-minute break, and we'll then have our next 2 presentation teams. We'll have the ACOM block, who won the Exemplary Program Award, and we will have the West Texas 3D COVID-19 Consortium talk about their work with dozens of community partners to help with the COVID-19 relief effort. So please stay on. We'll just take a quick break, and we'll see you in a few minutes. Thank you again. Bye-bye.